I stood in the bridal suite of the Belmont Harbor Hotel, staring at my reflection in the gilded mirror. Instead of wearing the $78,000 Oscar de la Renta wedding gown my mother had cried over when we found it, I was dressed in a tailored midnight blue jumpsuit with a single strand of pearls at my neck. My professionally styled hair and camera-ready makeup were a stark contrast to the traditional bridal look everyone expected. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The custom wedding gown hung pristinely on a satin-padded hanger behind me, untouched. In exactly 90 minutes, my fiancé, Ryan, would be standing at the altar in the grand ballroom downstairs. But I wouldn't be walking down the aisle, at least, not the way he expected. 8 months earlier, my life had been picture perfect. I was Olivia Parker, 32, the youngest department head at the Gardner Museum of Contemporary Art in Boston. Ryan Matthews, 34, was the golden boy at Everett & Shaw, one of the city's most prestigious law firms, where he made junior partner in record time. We had met at a charity auction 4 years ago, when we both bid on the same limited edition photography book. He'd won the bidding war but offered to let me borrow it sometime over coffee. That coffee turned into dinner, which turned into 4 years of what everyone called an ideal relationship. "You two are so rational together," my best friend, Mia, would say. "No drama, no games, just two grown-ups who have their lives together." And it was true. Our relationship had none of the turbulence that seemed to plague others. We had similar goals, compatible lifestyles, and a mutual respect that made decision-making straightforward. When Ryan proposed on our 3rd anniversary, with a vintage emerald ring, because I'd once mentioned I found diamonds overrated, I said yes without hesitation. It felt like the natural progression of our steady, dependable partnership. The wedding planning had been proceeding smoothly for months. Ryan didn't have strong opinions about most details, though he did insist on handling the guest list personally. "I deal with stakeholder management all day at work," he'd said with that confident smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Let me take this off your plate." I'd been grateful then. Coordinating with the museum's blockbuster Frida Kahlo exhibition while planning a wedding had stretched me thin, and Ryan's willingness to handle the invitations had seemed like a thoughtful partnership. "He's so considerate," my mother gushed over brunch. "Edward never helped with a single thing for our wedding." My father had simply harumphed behind his newspaper, but I could tell he approved of Ryan's efficiency and career success, even if he found the man a bit too polished for his taste. Our wedding was scheduled for the first Saturday in May at the Belmont Harbor Hotel, a recently restored historic building with panoramic views of the harbor. With 250 guests, top-tier vendors, and a reception that would feature a 7-piece orchestra, it was set to be what Boston Magazine had already coined the cultural event of the season. The museum board members would attend, as would the partners from Ryan's firm, along with the usual collection of family, friends, and strategic social connections. The day before our wedding, I'd been in my office at the museum, finalizing details for my 2-week absence during our honeymoon in southern France. My assistant Damon had poked his head at around 4 p.m. "The installation team needs you in Gallery C. Something about the lighting not matching the approved design?" I sighed, gathering my tablet. "I'll be right there. Can you email Ryan and let him know I might be a few minutes late to the rehearsal dinner?" "Already done," Damon had replied with his usual efficiency. "Also, that courier delivery you were expecting just arrived. I put the package on your desk." I'd barely registered his words as I'd hurried toward Gallery C, my mind already shifting to the lighting specifications for the delicate watercolors we were installing. It wasn't until hours later, after resolving the lighting crisis and rushing back to my office to grab my things for the rehearsal dinner, that I'd noticed the small, elegant envelope sitting atop the courier package. It wasn't museum stationery. It was cream-colored with a distinctive monogram I recognized immediately, the same monogram that adorned our wedding invitations. But this envelope wasn't addressed to me. The handwritten name across the front read, Vanessa Winters. Vanessa Winters, Ryan's ex-girlfriend, the woman he'd dated for 5 years before me. The successful corporate attorney he'd always described as too career-obsessed and unable to compromise. The relationship he claimed had ended amicably but permanently 2 years before we met. A strange feeling had settled in my stomach as I picked up the envelope. It wasn't sealed, just tucked closed. Without allowing myself to overthink, I'd opened it and removed a small handwritten card. Despite everything, I need you there. 5th row, left side, aisle seat. Some things remain unsaid. R. the Elegant. Script was unmistakably Ryan's. I'd seen it on countless birthday cards and post-it notes left on the bathroom mirror when he had early court dates. The implication was clear. My fiancé had personally invited his ex-girlfriend to our wedding without telling me, requesting she sit in a specific seat where he could easily see her from the altar. I'd stood frozen, the card trembling slightly, in my hand. This had to be a mistake, perhaps an old invitation he'd written years ago that somehow got mixed up in our wedding stationery. But no, the card referenced our wedding specifically, and the monogram was unique to our event. The rehearsal. Dinner was starting in 20 minutes at Roscoe's Trattoria, just a few blocks from the museum. I was expected there, smiling and gracious, playing the role of the excited bride-to-be. My parents had flown in from Phoenix that morning. Ryan's family had arrived from Chicago the day before. Everything was in motion. With deliberate calm, I'd taken a photo of the card, returned it to the envelope, and then placed it in my locked desk drawer. Then I applied fresh lipstick, straightened my dress, and headed to the restaurant, my mind running through possibilities, none of them innocent. Theo. Rehearsal dinner had been a blur. I'd moved through it on autopilot, smiling at appropriate moments, thanking Ryan's mother for the antique silver picture frame she'd given us as a pre-wedding gift, and listening to my future father-in-law's slightly too long toast about the Matthews men always marrying up. All the while I'd been watching Ryan, the way he checked his phone repeatedly, the slight distraction in his eyes when my father was talking to him, the extra glass of bourbon he'd had when he typically limited himself to 1 drink at professional functions. Had I ever really known him? Or had I fallen in love with the version of himself he carefully presented to me? When we'd parted that night, adhering to the tradition of spending the night before the wedding apart, Ryan had kissed me a beat too long, squeezing my hand as he whispered, "Tomorrow's the beginning of our real life together, Liv." I'd smiled and nodded, but inside, something had hardened. If tomorrow was indeed the beginning of our real life together, then perhaps it was time for some reality. Back in my hotel suite, instead of going through my bridal preparations checklist, I'd called Mia. "I need you to come to my suite, now. And don't tell anyone." To her credit, Mia had asked no questions, simply replying, "Give me 15 minutes." When she'd arrived, face flushed from rushing and still wearing her rehearsal dinner outfit, I'd handed her my phone with the photo of Ryan's note to Vanessa. "Holy shit," she'd whispered, looking up at me with wide eyes. "Liv, what are you going to do?" I'd been surprisingly calm. "First, I need to know if there's more to this than just a weird, inappropriate invitation. I need you to help me find some answers tonight." "Of course," Mia had said immediately. "Whatever you need." What I needed, it turned out, was access to information Ryan thought was safely hidden. While I'd been focused on the museum exhibition, entrusting Ryan with most of the wedding planning, he'd had months of freedom to communicate with Vanessa without my knowledge. But Ryan had made one critical mistake. He'd given me his laptop password months ago so I could order a surprise golf package for his birthday. He'd changed it since then, but I'd noticed him typing it in once while we were traveling, and I had a strong suspicion I knew what it was. "We need to get into his email," I'd told Mia. "And his messages." Mia had looked uncertain. "Liv, are you sure? That's..." That's what someone does when they find out their fiancé has secretly invited his ex to their wedding? I'd finished for her. Yes, I'm sure. This isn't about being paranoid. This is about not walking blindly into a marriage with someone who's clearly hiding things from me. While Mia had gone to get her laptop from her room, I'd called Damon. Despite the late hour, he'd answered immediately. Everything okay, boss? Wedding jitters? Damon, I need a favor that goes beyond your job description, and it needs to stay between us. There had been no hesitation in his voice. Name it. I need you to find out everything you can about Vanessa Winters. She's an attorney, probably still in Boston. I need to know where she works, where she lives, and any connection she still has to Ryan Matthews. You're Ryan Matthews? He'd asked, confusion evident. That's what I'm trying to determine, I'd replied. By midnight, Mia and I had confirmed my suspicions. Ryan's password had indeed been Fenway 1923, the ballpark and the year his grandfather was born. It had taken less than 5 minutes to access his email and less than 10 to find a folder labeled VW Correspondence. 4 years of emails, weekly messages during our entire relationship, coffee meetings scheduled regularly at a cafe near her office, late-night text exchanges about missing what we had and impossible situations. Photos shared between them, nothing explicit, but intimate in their casualness. Weekend trips that overlapped with Ryan's mandatory partner retreats. Most damning of all were the emails from the past 3 months, after our engagement, discussing what Vanessa called the wedding plan. Are you sure this is what you want? She'd written. I don't want to be the other woman forever, Ryan. His response had chilled me. Trust me. After the wedding, everything will change. I just need to secure certain things first. The Anderson account merger makes timing critical. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful. If you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The Anderson account. Ryan's biggest client. A merger he'd been working on for months, with the final contract set to be signed the week after our honeymoon. A merger that, according to one of Ryan's emails to Vanessa, hinges on the family man image Philip Anderson expects in his advisors. Philip Anderson, the notoriously conservative CEO, who had specifically chosen Ryan to handle the merger, because, as Ryan had proudly told me, he says, I represent the kind of traditional values he wants associated with his company's transition. The pieces had fallen into place with sickening clarity. Ryan needed to be married for the Anderson merger to go through. He needed the image, the stability, the perfect wife. But it was Vanessa he had been confiding in. Vanessa he had been seeing. Behind my back, Vanessa he had been planning some kind of future with. By 2 a.m., Damon had sent over his findings. Vanessa Winters was a partner at Caldwell & Price, one of Ryan's firm's major competitors. She specialized in corporate mergers, exactly the kind Ryan was handling with Anderson Global. There's more, Damon had written. According to a contact, in their HR, Vanessa Winters has submitted her resignation, effective 3 weeks from now. No announcement about where she's going next. I'd sat back on the hotel suite's plush sofa, letting the full picture sink in. My fiancé had maintained a relationship with his ex throughout our entire time together. He was marrying me to secure a business deal. And once that deal was signed, something would change, likely involving Vanessa's conveniently timed career. Move. What are you going to do? Mia had asked again, her voice gentle. I'd looked at the wedding dress hanging in its garment bag by the closet, the veil carefully steamed and arranged beside it. I'd thought about the 250 guests who would be arriving tomorrow, the vendors who had been paid in full, the museum board members, and Ryan's firm partners who would be witnessing our vows. I'm going to give Ryan exactly the wedding day he deserves, I'd said finally, just not the one he's expecting. Mia's eyes had widened. What does that mean? It means, I'd said, pulling out my phone, that we have about 18 hours to completely revise the wedding plan. and I'm going to need help. My first call had been to Tyler Barnes, my college roommate, who now worked as an event coordinator for a major Boston PR firm. If anyone could pull off last-minute logistical changes to a high-profile event, it was Tyler. "Liv, it's 2 a.m, he'd answered groggily. "Tyler, I need the kind of favor that earns me matron of honor status at your wedding someday. No questions asked, total discretion, and I need it to start right now." To his eternal credit, Tyler had been fully dressed and in my hotel suite within 40 minutes, laptop and emergency planning kit in hand. "Okay," he'd said, setting up Command Central on the suite's dining table. "Give me the rundown." As the night had progressed, our team had grown. Damon had arrived with coffee and pastries at 4 a.m., bringing with him a USB drive containing what he called digital insurance. My cousin Elena, who worked in corporate security, had joined remotely via video call from her home in New York. By sunrise, Operation Wedding Revision was fully formed. Vendors had been contacted with very specific updated instructions. Key guests had received discreet messages asking them to arrive 30 minutes earlier than the time stated on the invitation. A small team of trusted friends had been assigned specific roles, and I had commissioned a custom midnight blue jumpsuit to be delivered to my suite by noon. Looking at my reflection now in the mirror of the bridal suite, I felt a strange calm. In less than 2 hours, Ryan Matthews would discover that his carefully constructed deception was about to collapse. But first, he would experience the same shock of betrayal that I had felt reading that note to Vanessa. My phone buzzed with a text from Mia. "She's here, 5th row, left side, aisle seat, wearing emerald green, same color as your engagement ring. Coincidence?" I smiled grimly at my reflection. No, not a coincidence at all. Nothing about this had been coincidental. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Tyler. "All systems go. Officiant briefed. Photographer in position. Live stream channels secured." I picked up my clutch bag, checking one last time that the USB drive was safely tucked inside. On it was every email, every text, every piece of evidence showing not just Ryan's personal betrayal, but potential ethical violations regarding the Anderson merger, information that both the Bar Association and his firm's ethics committee would find very interesting. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, knowing exactly who it would be. Elena slipped into the room, elegant in her bridesmaid dress, but with a distinctly non-wedding accessory, a small tactical earpiece. "Security team is in place," she said without preamble. "We've got the reception hall covered, all digital systems are under our control, and—" She paused, a small smile playing at her lips. "Ryan just arrived. He's in the groom's suite with his groomsmen, none the wiser." "And our special guest?" I asked. "Kelsey is ready in the secondary bridal suite. The dress fits her perfectly. Your father is already briefed and waiting to escort her." Kelsey Mitchell, an aspiring actress I'd met through the museum's theatrical program development, had the same height and build as me. More importantly, she understood both the ethical importance and dramatic potential of the role she'd be playing today. With the wedding veil obscuring most of her face, guests who didn't know me well wouldn't notice the difference, especially from behind. "Perfect," I nodded, smoothing down my jumpsuit. "And the cameras?" "All set. Main videographer thinks he's just getting standard wedding footage. Our secondary team has hidden cameras positioned throughout the ballroom and reception hall, with particular focus on Ryan, his parents, and—" her smile turned predatory— "his special guest in the 5th row. I took a deep breath, centering myself. The calm I felt wasn't from shock or denial. It was the tranquility that comes with absolute certainty. "All right then," I said, picking up my phone to check the time. T-minus 85 minutes until showtime. As Elena and I went through final preparations, I thought about the moment I'd discovered Ryan's betrayal. In those initial hours, I'd cycled through hurt, rage, and disbelief. But by morning, those emotions had crystallized into something much more powerful: resolve. Ryan had used our relationship and impending marriage as a business strategy. He'd maintained a connection with Vanessa while building a life with me. He'd planned to hurt me, perhaps not immediately, but eventually, after he'd secured what he needed. Well, I'd never been one to leave an exhibition half-installed. If Ryan wanted a wedding spectacle, he would get one, just not the kind he was expecting. The string quartet began playing in the ballroom below, their melodic notes filtering up through the hotel's historic ventilation system. The same music Ryan and I had selected together during one of our planning meetings where he'd held my hand and talked about our future while keeping up his secret correspondence with Vanessa. "It's almost time," Elena said, checking her watch. "The guests are being seated now." I nodded, feeling strangely light. Let's give them a wedding they'll never forget. The muted sounds of guests arriving filtered through the thick wooden door of my suite. I checked the time again, 75 minutes until the ceremony was scheduled to begin. In the adjacent room, my mother would be looking for me soon, expecting to help with the final touches on the wedding gown I wouldn't be wearing. "We need to move to phase 2, I told Elena, who nodded and tapped her earpiece. "Commence secondary. Surveillance," she murmured. "All units confirm positions." My phone lit up with a new message from Damon. "Ryan just requested champagne be sent to his suite. His best man Kevin looks nervous. They're having an intense conversation by the window." I smiled. Kevin Walsh had been Ryan's roommate-in-law, school and his closest confidant. If anyone else knew about the wedding plan, it would be Kevin. "Elena, can we get audio from the groom's suite?" I asked. She shook her head. "Too risky with the regular hotel staff coming and going, but we have visual through the security feed Mia hacked into." She handed me her tablet, where I could see Ryan adjusting his bow tie in a mirror while Kevin paced behind him, checking his watch repeatedly. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from Tyler. "Officiant is fully briefed. He's got the envelope with the evidence and knows exactly when to discover it." The morning after finding Ryan's note to Vanessa, I'd made a crucial decision. Rather than simply confronting Ryan privately, I would ensure that his deception was revealed publicly, at the very event he was using to solidify his business credentials. The carefully curated guest list, full of his colleagues, business associates, and clients, would witness the true character of the man they trusted with their legal affairs. But first, I needed to understand just how deep the deception went. During those early morning hours in my hotel suite, while Tyler coordinated logistics and Mia monitored Ryan's communications, Damon had been compiling a comprehensive dossier on the Anderson merger. "The timing lines up perfectly," he'd confirmed, showing me a document timeline. "The final contracts are scheduled to be signed the Monday after you return from your honeymoon. There's a morality clause in Philip Anderson's standard contracts. He's notorious for it. Any hint of ethical impropriety, and he pulls out of deals completely." Elena had been even more thorough in her investigation. As a corporate security specialist, she had contacts throughout Boston's business community, including at Vanessa's law firm, Caldwell and Price. "Vanessa Winters has been expertly covering her tracks," Elena had reported, "but she slipped up recently. 3 weeks ago, she reserved a corner office at Everett and Shaw, Ryan's firm, under a partner designation. The reservation is in the internal system but hasn't been announced publicly." The pieces had come together with disturbing clarity. Ryan was marrying me to project the stable family man image Philip Anderson required for the merger. Once the contracts were signed, Vanessa would join Ryan's firm as a partner, brought in specifically for her expertise in corporate mergers. Their professional and personal relationships would be consolidated, while I wasn't entirely clear what Ryan had planned for me after securing the Anderson deal, but the emails suggested a gradual distancing, perhaps a mutual decision to separate after a respectable amount of time, or a realization that we wanted different things. Whatever his long-term plan, the immediate strategy was evident. Use our wedding as the final proof of his stability and commitment, with Vanessa watching from her strategically placed seat, knowing that their time was coming soon. New development, Elena announced, drawing me back to the present. Vanessa just received a text message. Our team caught it on the long-range camera. She showed me a zoomed-in image of Vanessa's phone screen. The message was from Ryan. Everything proceeded as planned. After the vows, meet me by the East Terrace during photographs. 5 minutes is all we need. My heart should have hurt seeing this confirmation, but instead, I felt a strange satisfaction. Every new piece of evidence strengthened my resolve and justified the elaborate countermeasure I was about to execute. A soft knock at the door made both Elena and me freeze. "Olivia! Honey, it's Mom. The coordinator is looking for you. We need to start getting you into your dress." Elena moved swiftly to the door, opening it just enough to peek through. "Mrs. Parker, Olivia's just having a quiet moment of reflection," she said smoothly. "Pre-wedding jitters. Could you give her about 10 more minutes?" I could hear the concern in my mother's voice. "Of course, but the photographer wants to start the getting ready shots soon." And Ryan's mother was asking about the traditional something borrowed she wanted to give Olivia. "I'll make sure she gets it," Elena promised. "We're just having a small bridesmaid pep talk." After my mother's footsteps faded, Elena turned to me with raised eyebrows. "The something borrowed?" "A diamond tennis bracelet that's been worn by every Matthews bride for 3 generations," I explained, recalling Ryan's mother Barbara showing it to me months ago, her eyes shining with pride as she described how her son had found the perfect addition to our family. Elena nodded. "What do you want to do with it?" "Give it to Kelsey to wear. Authenticity matters in a performance." My phone buzzed with another message from Mia. "Philip Anderson just arrived with his wife. They're seated in the 3rd row, right side, his chief. Legal counsel is with them." Perfect. The key witness to Ryan's carefully constructed image was in place. "It's time to brief your father," Elena said gently. "Are you sure he can handle his part?" I smiled, thinking of my father, a retired detective who had spent 30 years with the Phoenix Police Department before retiring to play golf and spoil my mother. "Dad will be fine. He'll probably enjoy this more than walking me down the aisle for real." Elena nodded and sent a quick text. Within minutes, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was my father, distinguished in his tuxedo, but with a familiar determined set to his jaw that I remembered from my childhood whenever he was working a tough case. "Livy," he said quietly as he entered, taking in my jumpsuit instead of the wedding gown. "Your mother just asked me when I was coming to escort you to the bridal suite for photos." "Dad, I need to tell you something," I began, but he held up a hand. "Elena filled me in on the basics last night," he said, surprising me. "I know that Ryan has been lying to you and carrying on with someone else. What I need to know now is, what's the plan and how can I help?" For a moment, I was speechless. Then I laughed softly. "Once a detective, always a detective, huh?" He smiled, but his eyes remained serious. "Livy, I've spent my life teaching you to stand up for yourself and to never let anyone take advantage of you. If this man has betrayed you, then by God he'll answer for it. Just tell me what you need." I took a deep breath and laid out his role in the plan. As I spoke, his expression shifted from concern to grim satisfaction. "So, I'll still be walking. A bride down the aisle," he summarized when I finished. "Just not my daughter." "Exactly. Kelsey will be veiled, so from the back, guests won't notice the difference. You'll walk her halfway down the aisle, then stop when Tyler gives the signal. That's when I'll make my entrance from the side door." My father nodded slowly. "And the video evidence of Ryan's indiscretions?" "Will begin playing on the reception hall screens at precisely that moment." "And you're sure this is what you want?" he asked, studying my face. Not just confronting him privately? I met his gaze steadily. This isn't just about me, Dad. Ryan is using our wedding to secure a major business deal under false pretenses. He's deceiving his firm, his clients, and violating ethical standards of his profession. This isn't a personal dispute. It's exposing corruption. Something in my father's expression shifted, a professional recognition replacing parental concern. I understand. I'll do my part. He hugged me briefly, then straightened his shoulders. I should get to the secondary bridal suite. Kelsey will need support, and we should practice our walk once more before showtime. After he left, Elena checked her watch. 50 minutes until the ceremony. We should move to the staging area soon. My phone buzzed with a message from Tyler. Ryan just sent another text to Vanessa. Our team intercepted it. When the minister asks if anyone objects, that's your cue. Everything is arranged. So that was their plan, a dramatic objection during the ceremony, likely followed by Ryan's reluctant admission that he couldn't go through with marrying me because of his undying love for Vanessa. A public spectacle designed to elicit sympathy for their star-crossed romance while letting him appear somewhat honorable for not going through with a loveless marriage. How considerate of him. Send that to the media team, I instructed Elena. Add it to the evidence compilation. In addition to the guests inside the hotel ballroom, our plan included a live stream that would be sent to several key individuals who couldn't attend in person, including the senior partners at Ryan's firm, the ethics committee chair of the Massachusetts Bar Association, and several financial journalists who had been covering the Anderson merger. My phone rang. It was Mia. Liv, you need to see this, she said without preamble. Ryan's mother just gave Vanessa a small gift box. They met in the ladies' room, and our team caught the exchange on camera. Barbara looked complicit. That stung in a way Ryan's betrayal hadn't. Barbara Matthews had welcomed me into their family, had spent hours showing me family photo albums and sharing stories about Ryan's childhood. She'd helped me select floral arrangements and tasted cake samples when Ryan was too busy with work. All while knowing about Vanessa, perhaps even facilitating their continued relationship. Get clear footage of that exchange, I instructed. Add it to the compilation. It seemed the deception extended throughout the Matthews family. Ryan's father, Judge William Matthews of the Massachusetts Superior Court, had always treated me with courtly respect. Had he known too? Was the entire family complicit in this charade? A fresh wave of resolve washed over me. This wasn't just about exposing Ryan anymore. It was about unmasking an entire system of deception that had been constructed around me. Elena's tablet pinged with an alert. The guests are nearly all seated, she reported. And look who just arrived. She showed me the security feed from the hotel lobby. Gregory Spencer, the managing partner of Everett & Shaw, was being escorted to his seat by one of the ushers. Next to him was Diane Everett, the founding partner's daughter and the firm's chief ethics counsel. Did we confirm they've received access to the livestream link? I asked. Elena nodded. They'll be able to watch the reception hall feed on their phones, even while sitting in the ceremony. My phone buzzed again with a message from Damon. All financial documentation digitized and ready for distribution. SEC contacts standing by. The Securities and Exchange Commission had been an unexpected addition to our plan. While digging through Ryan's emails, Damon had discovered communications suggesting that information about the Anderson merger had been leaked to select investors, weeks before the public announcement. A clear violation of securities laws. What about Judge Matthews? I asked Elena. Any indication he's aware of what's happening? She shook her head. Our team reports he's been greeting guests normally, acting every bit the proud father of the groom. Either he's an excellent actor, or he genuinely doesn't know about Ryan's arrangement with Vanessa. That at least was somewhat comforting. I'd always respected Judge Matthews, and the thought that he might have knowingly participated in his son's deception had been particularly Disappointing. It's time, Elena said, checking her watch again. The ceremony starts in 30 minutes, and we need to get you to the staging area. I took one last look in the mirror, smoothing the sleek lines of my midnight blue jumpsuit. The woman who looked back at me wasn't a victim or a jilted bride. She was a professional who had uncovered corruption and was methodically exposing it. As Elena and I moved through the service corridors of the hotel, carefully avoiding the main hallways where guests might see me, my phone continued to buzz with updates from our team. Kelsey is in position in the main bridal suite. The dress looks perfect. Ryan just took his place at the altar with Kevin and the groomsmen. Vanessa just checked her makeup again and placed some kind of note in her clutch. Purse. Each message confirmed that all the players were taking their positions, unaware that the script had been completely rewritten. We reached the side entrance to the ballroom, where Tyler waited with a tablet displaying multiple camera feeds from inside. "Everything's set," he whispered, his event planner's calm slightly strained by the unusual circumstances. "Your father is with Kelsey, ready to walk her down the aisle when the music starts. The officiant has the evidence envelope in his Bible. The photographer is positioned to capture both Ryan's face and Vanessa's reaction." "And the reception hall screens?" I asked. "Ready to activate the moment you give the signal. We've tested them 3 times this morning." I peered through the small window in the door. From this angle, I could see the back of the ballroom, filled with elegantly dressed guests, and the altar where Ryan stood, periodically checking his watch and scanning the crowd, no doubt looking for Vanessa in her assigned seat. The string quartet began playing the processional music for the bridesmaids. One by one, Mia and the other bridesmaids began their carefully timed walks down the aisle, each giving an almost imperceptible nod to the hidden cameras as they passed. "Bride is ready for processional," came a message from the wedding coordinator, through Elena's earpiece. "Confirm the bride's father is in position," Elena responded, maintaining the charade for the coordinator's benefit. "Confirmed. Processional begins in 2 minutes." Tyler squeezed my arm encouragingly. "Ready to give the performance of a lifetime?" I nodded, feeling strangely calm. Everyone deserves a wedding day they'll never forget. The traditional bridal march began, and through the window, I watched as the ballroom doors opened. The guests rose to their feet, turning to witness the entrance of the bride. From this angle, I could see Ryan's face clearly as he caught his first glimpse of the veiled figure in white at the back of the room. His expression showed relief. Everything was proceeding according to his plan, or so he thought. Kelsey, her face obscured by the long veil, took my father's arm. They began the slow, deliberate walk down the aisle, exactly as we had practiced. My father's posture was perfect, his expression appropriately solemn yet proud, every inch the father of the bride. Through the window, I saw Ryan's best man Kevin shift nervously, checking his watch. In the 5th row, left side, Vanessa Winters sat in her emerald green dress, her hand resting on her clutch purse, ready for her moment. "Now," I whispered to Elena, who immediately relayed the command through her earpiece. Across the hotel in the empty reception hall, the massive screens that had been set up to display wedding photos during the cocktail hour silently came to life, loading the evidence compilation that would soon be viewed by key observers outside the ceremony. In the ballroom, my father and Kelsey reached the halfway point of the aisle. Right on cue, they stopped. A murmur of confusion rippled through the guests. Ryan's face registered the first flicker of uncertainty, quickly masked with a professional smile. The officiant, perfectly briefed on his role, stepped forward with concern. "Is everything all right?" That was my signal. Tyler opened the side door, and I stepped into the ballroom, the overhead lights catching the midnight blue of my jumpsuit. As I moved forward to stand beside my father and the veiled Kelsey, the gasps from the guests were audible, a wave of shock traveling from the back of the room to the front as people realized there were now 2 brides, one in traditional white, still veiled, and one in striking blue, very much revealed. Ryan's expression froze, his carefully constructed composure cracking for the first time. "I believe," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's perfect acoustics, "that this ceremony requires some amendments before it proceeds." In the fifth row, left side, Vanessa Winters went completely still, her hand clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. The show was just beginning. The ballroom fell into stunned silence. 250 pairs of eyes darted between me and my midnight blue jumpsuit, the veiled bride in white, and Ryan at the altar, whose complexion had taken on an alarming pallor. "What's going on?" he finally managed, his voice carrying a tremor I'd never heard before. "Olivia, what is this?" I smiled pleasantly, as if we were discussing weekend plans over brunch rather than derailing a wedding ceremony in front of Boston's social elite. "This," I replied, gesturing to the scene around us, "is what happens when a groom plans one wedding while his bride plans another." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. From the corner of my eye, I saw Philip Anderson lean forward in his seat, eyes narrowing with the focused attention that had built his business empire. "I don't understand," Ryan said, attempting to reclaim control of the situation. His lawyer's instincts were kicking in. Deny, deflect, demand proof. "Let me clarify," I said, stepping forward. "While I was planning our wedding, you were planning something else entirely. Something that involved a special guest." I turned toward the fifth row, left side. "Would you care to stand up, Vanessa? Since you're wearing such a lovely emerald green dress, the same color as my engagement ring." What thoughtful coordination. Vanessa Winters remained frozen in her seat, her expression caught between defiance and panic as all eyes turned to her. "Perhaps this will help," I continued, nodding to the officiant. Right on cue, he opened his Bible and removed the envelope we had planted there. "I found this among the ceremony materials," he said, sounding genuinely perplexed as he handed it to Ryan. Ryan took the envelope, his hands visibly shaking. When he opened it and saw the contents, printed copies of his emails with Vanessa, including the secret invitation, his face went from pale to ashen. "These are private communications," he said, his voice hardening as he tried to regain his footing. "This is an invasion of privacy and completely inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" I echoed. "Like secretly inviting your ex-girlfriend to our wedding and arranging for her to dramatically object during the ceremony? Like planning to use our marriage to secure the Anderson merger before transitioning to some new arrangement with Vanessa?" A collective gasp went through the ballroom. "Philip." Anderson rose halfway from his seat, his expression thunderous. "Or perhaps," I continued, "you mean it's inappropriate to use confidential client information to tip off investors before the Anderson merger announcement?" At this, Ryan's father, Judge Matthews, stood up. "That's enough, Olivia. Whatever personal grievance you have with my son can be addressed privately. This display is beneath you." I turned to face him directly. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this isn't just a personal grievance. This is about professional ethics, securities violations, and a conspiracy that extends beyond Ryan and Vanessa." I nodded to Elena, who tapped her earpiece. "Execute media protocol." Throughout the ballroom, the phones of select guests, including Gregory Spencer and Diane Everett from Ryan's firm, pinged with a notification. They were now receiving the live stream from the reception hall, where the evidence compilation was playing on the large screens. "For those who just received a message," I announced, "you now have access to a complete dossier of evidence. You'll find emails between Ryan and Vanessa dating throughout our relationship, details about their plan for today's ceremony, and documentation of information leaks regarding the Anderson merger that benefited certain investors, including Vanessa's clients at Caldwell and Price." Ryan lunged forward, only to be held back by his best man. "You had no right," he hissed, abandoning all pretense of confusion for raw anger. "Those were private servers, private accounts." "Actually," I cut in, "as your fiancé with access, To our shared home office and joint devices, I had every legal right. A fact your father, the judge, might appreciate, even if you don't. Judge Matthews had pulled out his phone and was staring at the screen in growing horror. Beside him, Barbara Matthews was whispering urgently in his ear, her face a mask of panic. Would anyone else like to stand at this point? I asked, turning back to Vanessa. Perhaps you, Vanessa. Or you, Mrs. Matthews. I believe you both have speaking roles in the original script for today's performance. Barbara Matthews paled visibly, but remained seated, her eyes darting between her son at the altar and her husband, who was still scrolling through the evidence, on his phone with increasing agitation. Vanessa finally stood, her composure returning as she smoothed her emerald dress. This is all being taken wildly out of context, she said, her attorney's voice steady and authoritative. Ryan and I maintained a friendship, nothing more. These insinuations are slanderous. A friendship that included planning to object at his wedding? I asked. A friendship that coincided with your upcoming move to Everett and Shaw as a new partner? Perhaps you'd like to explain the text Ryan sent you 20 minutes ago about meeting on the East Terrace after the ceremony? Vanessa's professional mask slipped for a moment. You're monitoring our text messages? Only the ones sent in this. Building on this network, Elena clarified smoothly from beside me. Standard security protocol for high-profile events. Philip Anderson was now fully standing, his wife tugging urgently at his sleeve, trying to get him to sit down. Mr. Matthews, he boomed, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Is it true that information about our merger was leaked to investors associated with Ms. Winters? Before Ryan could formulate a response, Diane Everett from his firm stood up as well. I think we need to pause these proceedings, she said, her voice clipped with professional concern. Ryan, we need to speak immediately. The ballroom had transformed from a wedding venue into something resembling a deposition. Half the guests were now on their phones, either viewing the evidence or messaging others about what was unfolding. Through it all, my father had remained steadfastly beside me, with Kelsey still veiled in the wedding dress at his other side. Now, with perfect timing, he spoke. As the father of the bride, the real bride, he said, his voice carrying the authoritative tone of his decades in law enforcement, I think everyone deserves to know exactly what kind of man Ryan Matthews is. He nodded to Kelsey, who reached up and removed her veil, revealing her face to the gasping crowd and making it clear to everyone that she was not me. Ryan staggered backward slightly, looking from Kelsey to me and back again, as the full implications of our switcheroo sank in. You planned all this, he said, accusation heavy in his voice. You deliberately set me up. No, Ryan, I replied calmly. You set yourself up the moment you decided to use our wedding as a business transaction. I merely made sure everyone could see it for what it was. Kevin, Ryan's best man, had been getting increasingly agitated as the scene unfolded. Now, he stepped forward, pulling something from his jacket pocket. Ryan, man, we need to get out of here, he said urgently. This is going south fast. But as he moved, Tyler smoothly intercepted him, relieving him of what turned out to be a small flash drive. Looking for this? Tyler asked, holding it up. The backup of all your communications about the investor tips ahead of the Anderson announcement? Don't worry, we already have copies. Kevin went pale. How did you— Kevin Walsh, my father interjected, his detective instincts fully engaged. Wasn't your brother-in-law, Jonathan Price, recently appointed to the SEC's Enforcement Division? Interesting connection, given what we're learning here. This new revelation sent another shockwave through the ballroom. Jonathan Price was a rising star at the Securities and Exchange Commission, recently put in charge of investigating insider trading in merger and acquisition cases. This is absurd, Ryan tried again, looking desperately around the room for allies. His gaze landed on his parents. Mom, Dad, please. But Judge Matthews was now standing rigidly, the distinguished jurist visibly processing the legal implications of what he was seeing on his phone screen. Barbara had buried her face in her hands. "I'm curious," I said, turning to Barbara. "When exactly did you start helping Ryan and Vanessa with their plan? Was it before or after you showed me those family photo albums and told me how happy you were to welcome me into the Matthews family?" Barbara raised her head, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Ryan and Vanessa have history. They were always meant to be together. This was just complicated by business considerations." "By business considerations? Do you mean using me to secure the Anderson merger?" I asked. "Or do you mean insider trading?" Barbara's eyes widened, with genuine shock. "Insider? No, I never knew about any of that. William," she turned to her husband desperately, "I didn't know about any financial impropriety, I swear." Judge Matthews didn't respond to his wife. Instead, he stepped into the aisle and addressed the room with the gravity of the courtroom. "As an officer of the court," he said, his voice heavy with suppressed emotion, "I cannot and will not be present for what appears to be evidence of potential legal violations. I will be recusing myself from this situation and contacting the appropriate authorities." He turned to me. "Ms. Parker, I offer my profound apologies for whatever role my family has played in this deception." With that, he walked steadily toward the exit, his judicial bearing intact even as his family crumbled behind him. Philip Anderson had been conferring with his legal counsel and now approached the altar, completely ignoring standard wedding etiquette. The Anderson global merger with Everett and Shaw is officially on hold pending a full investigation, he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mr. Matthews, our legal team will be in touch regarding potential breach of fiduciary duty claims." Ryan, now looking physically ill, turned to Gregory Spencer, the managing partner who had been watching the unfolding disaster with increasing horror. "Greg, I can explain all of this." Spencer cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Not here, not now. Consider yourself suspended effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal items from the office on Monday." He turned to Diane Everett. "We need to contact the Bar Association Ethics Committee before this goes any further." With each passing minute, Ryan's carefully constructed world was disintegrating. The professional consequences were mounting, but I wasn't finished yet. This wasn't just about exposing his business improprieties, it was about confronting the personal betrayal head-on. "You know what fascinates me most about all this, Ryan?" I said, drawing his attention back to me. "How you could spend 4 years with someone, plan a life together, and all the while be orchestrating an elaborate deception. Did you ever actually care about me at all? Or was I just conveniently placed at the museum gala that night, a perfect prospective wife for your professional image?" For the first time since I'd known him, Ryan seemed at a loss for words. The smooth-talking attorney who could charm juries and persuade judges was reduced to opening and closing his mouth without sound. "She knows," Vanessa said suddenly, stepping into the aisle. "She knows everything, Ryan. About us meeting every Tuesday at Westfield's Coffee, about the weekend in Chicago when you were supposedly at a law conference, about the plans for after the Anderson deal closed." She laughed bitterly. "Your perfect, unsuspecting curator fiancé turned out to be a better investigator than either of us anticipated." Ryan's face contorted with anger. "Shut up, Vanessa! This isn't helping!" "Helping?" she echoed incredulously. "Nothing can help. This situation now, your career is over, our plans are finished. All because you couldn't wait 3 more weeks to secure the Anderson deal before moving on with our real plans." Their public argument was providing even more confirmation of everything I'd discovered, but I found no satisfaction in it. Instead, I felt a strange sort of pity for both of them, so caught up in their schemes that they'd lost sight of basic human decency. For the record, I said, addressing the stunned wedding guests who remained rooted to their seats, unwilling to miss a moment of the unfolding drama. I had no intention of humiliating anyone today. My goal was simply to expose the truth before I unwittingly became part of a fraud, both personal and professional. I turned to Elena, who had maintained her position slightly behind me. I think it's time for the final phase. She nodded and tapped her earpiece again. Execute legal protocol. On cue, the ballroom doors opened, and 3 individuals in suits entered. I recognized Amanda Chen, the SEC enforcement officer Damon had contacted, flanked by 2 colleagues. Mr. Matthews, Mr. Walsh, she announced professionally. We'd like to speak with you regarding some concerning information we've received about potential securities violations related to the Anderson Global merger. The gasps and murmurs among the guests reached a crescendo. What had begun as a society wedding had transformed into a very public downfall. Ryan, seeing the SEC representatives approaching, finally lost his composure completely. "This is your fault," he snarled at me, all pretense of refinement gone. "You've ruined everything." "No, Ryan," I replied calmly. "You did that yourself the moment you decided to build our relationship on lies." As the SEC officers escorted Ryan and Kevin toward a side room for preliminary questioning, I turned to address the bewildered guests one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the unexpected turn of events today. While there won't be a wedding ceremony or reception as planned, I've arranged for the catering staff to serve the meal for those who wish to stay. The bar is open, and I imagine there's quite a lot to discuss." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Then, something unexpected happened. Philip Anderson stepped forward and addressed me directly. "Ms. Parker, while I regret the circumstances, I must commend your integrity. If you ever decide to leave the museum world, Anderson Global could use someone with your investigative skills and ethical backbone in our compliance department." I smiled politely. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson, but I'm quite happy at the Gardner, though I may be taking some personal time in the immediate future." "Of course," he nodded understandingly. "Perhaps the south of France? I believe you already have." "The tickets," I laughed despite myself. "Actually, I do. It seems a shame to waste a perfectly good trip." As the crowd began to disperse, some rushing out to make calls, others gathering in small groups to dissect what they'd witnessed, my father came to stand beside me. "You okay, Livy?" he asked quietly. I took a deep breath, suddenly feeling the emotional weight of the past 24 hours. "I will be," I said honestly. "It's not exactly how I imagined my wedding day, but then again, neither was anything else about this relationship." Mia approached, slipping her arm through mine. "The car is ready whenever you want to leave. And for what it's worth, that jumpsuit looks way better than the wedding dress ever did." I smiled at my loyal friend. "Thanks for having my back through all this." "Always," she replied simply. As we moved toward the exit, I caught sight of Barbara, Matthew sitting alone, abandoned by both her husband and son. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. I detoured slightly to approach her. "Mrs. Matthews," I said softly. She looked up, her carefully applied makeup streaked with tears. "Olivia, I just wanted to say that I'm sorry it came to this," I told her sincerely. "I truly did care for your family." She nodded, seeming to age years in minutes. "I know, that's what makes it worse." She reached into her purse and pulled out the antique bracelet she had planned to loan me as my something borrowed. "You should have this, not to keep, but as an acknowledgement." Gently pushed her hand back. "Keep it for someone who truly becomes part of your family someday." As I turned to go, she called after me, "What will you do now?" I paused, considering her question. "First, I think I'll go to France. After that," I smiled slightly. "I'm a curator, Mrs. Matthews. I'll piece together something meaningful from what remains." With that, I rejoined my father, Mia and the rest of my support team, leaving behind the wedding that never was and the life I had almost been tricked into living. Outside, the Belmont Harbor Hotel, spring sunshine sparkled off the water. Elena handed me my phone, which showed dozens of missed calls and messages. "The museum board wants to speak with you," she reported. "Apparently, they're extremely impressed with your attention to detail and investigative acumen," Tyler added. "And 3 different news outlets have requested interviews about the securities investigation." I shook my head, taking a deep breath of fresh air. All of that can wait. Right now, I just want to go somewhere quiet with the people who actually care about me. My father squeezed my shoulder supportively. "The house in Cape Cod is empty this time of year. Your mother and I were planning to go there after the wedding anyway." "Perfect," I decided. "Cape Cod it is. And maybe France after that." As our cars pulled away from the hotel, I didn't look back at the venue that should have hosted the beginning of my married life. Instead, I looked forward, toward the ocean, toward honest relationships, and toward a future entirely of my own making. Behind us, Ryan Matthews' carefully constructed facade continued to crumble, one revelation at a time. But that was no longer my concern. I had exposed the truth, prevented a fraud, and reclaimed my dignity. Sometimes the happiest ending isn't the one in the fairy tales. Sometimes it's simply the freedom to write your own story. The drive to Cape Cod took just under 2 hours. I spent most of it staring out the window as Mia navigated the Saturday afternoon traffic, my mind replaying fragments of the morning's events like disconnected scenes from a film. The stunned expressions of the guests, the way Ryan's face had crumpled when he realized what was happening. The SEC officers appeared at the back of the ballroom. Reality hadn't fully settled in yet, but I was grateful for the protective bubble my friends and family had created around me. Dad drove ahead in his car with Elena, while Tyler and Damon followed behind us in a third vehicle. We moved as a caravan, a mobile fortress of support. "Your phone keeps buzzing," Mia observed as we crossed the Sagamore Bridge. "Want me to check it?" I nodded, too emotionally drained to care who might be trying to reach me. Mia scrolled through the notifications. 3 voicemails from the museum. Board chair, 2 from Philip Anderson, that's interesting, and about 30 text messages from various wedding guests. She glanced at me. "Oh, and the Boston Globe, the Herald, and apparently CNN want statements." CNN? That surprised me enough to break through my numbness. How did this become national news so quickly? Liv, you publicly exposed a potential securities fraud case involving one of Boston's top law firms and a billion-dollar merger. That's definitely national news territory. She paused, reading another incoming message. Also, apparently someone live-streamed parts of the confrontation. It's trending on Twitter under non-wedding whistleblower. I groaned, letting my head fall, back against the headrest. Perfect. Just what I needed. "If it helps," Mia offered, "the comments are overwhelmingly supportive of you. You're being called a hero for corporate transparency and the face of ethical resistance." She scrolled further. "Oh, and jumpsuit queen. That midnight blue outfit is getting serious fashion attention." Despite everything, I found myself smiling faintly. At least the jumpsuit was a good call. As we pulled into the long gravel driveway of my parents' Cape Cod house, I felt a wave of relief at the sight of the weathered cedar-shingled cottage. My childhood summer refuge looked exactly the same. The blue hydrangeas my mother painstakingly cultivated, the slightly crooked weather vane, the wide porch with its mismatched rocking chairs. It existed in a different universe from the luxury hotel ballroom I'd left behind. My mother was waiting on the porch, having driven up earlier that morning. She'd left the ceremony just after my dramatic entrance, forewarned by my father about what was about to unfold. She enfolded me in a fierce hug as I climbed the porch steps. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, holding me at arm's length to examine my face. Are you okay? I'm... I searched for the right word. I wasn't fine. Not exactly. But I wasn't devastated either. I'm processing. Mom nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. Well, you'll process with food and rest. I've made a ridiculous amount of comfort food, and the guest rooms are all ready. As we settled into the house's comforting embrace, my team, assembled in the large kitchen that had been the heart of every family gathering since I was a child. Mom distributed bowls of her legendary clam chowder while Dad uncorked several bottles of wine. To Olivia, Elena proposed, raising her glass, who demonstrated that the best curators don't just preserve history, they make it. Everyone clinked. Glasses. But I felt undeserving of their celebration. I didn't want to make history, I admitted. I just wanted the truth to be known before I made the biggest mistake of my life. The truth has a way of rippling outward, my father observed. One act of honesty often exposes bigger deceptions. Damon, who had been monitoring his laptop at the kitchen counter, looked up. Speaking of ripples, you should know that Everett and Shaw just issued a formal statement. They've placed Ryan on administrative leave pending an internal investigation, and are fully cooperating with regulatory authorities regarding the Anderson Global merger. Which means they're in full damage control mode, Elena translated. They'll be distancing themselves from Ryan as fast as possible. Tyler's phone pinged with a notification. Caldwell and Price just announced they've accepted Vanessa Winters' resignation, effective immediately. They're also reviewing all her client accounts. The professional consequences were mounting quickly, just as we had anticipated. But despite having orchestrated this outcome, I felt no triumph, just a hollow sense of necessity. What happens now with the SEC investigation? I asked Damon, who had the most experience with corporate governance through his museum work. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the kitchen island. Based on the evidence we compiled, they'll conduct interviews and review trading records. If they find what we think they'll find, there could be civil penalties at minimum. Criminal charges are possible, especially given the communication records, showing intent. The potential severity of Ryan's situation was sinking in. What had started as exposing a personal betrayal had escalated into something with life-altering legal consequences. Do you regret it? Mia asked softly, reading my expression. Going public instead of just confronting him privately? I considered her question carefully. No, I said finally. The personal betrayal was painful enough, but the professional misconduct affected more than just me. The investors who were disadvantaged by the information leaks, the firm's clients who trusted Ryan with their legal matters, even Philip Anderson's company employees whose livelihoods could have been impacted by a merger built on deception. I shook my head. Some truths need to be public. Mom squeezed my shoulder as she refilled my wine glass. That's my girl, always seeing the bigger picture. As evening settled over the Cape, my team gradually dispersed throughout the house. Elena set up a makeshift security operation in the den, monitoring media coverage and fielding urgent communications. Tyler retreated to the sunroom to coordinate with the wedding vendors who were still dealing with the aftermath at the hotel. Damon was in quiet conversation with his SEC contact, providing additional documentation they had requested. I found myself on the back porch, wrapped in a faded quilt from my childhood bedroom, watching the sun disappear over the bay. Mia joined me, silently passing me a mug of hot chocolate spiked with something stronger. Your phone's been blowing. Up again, she reported, settling into the adjacent chair. Judge Matthews called. Twice. I turned to her, surprised. Did he leave a message? She nodded. He says he needs to speak with you about matters of legal significance and that it's unrelated to familial concerns. What do you think that means? If I had to guess? Mia sipped her own drink thoughtfully. He's worried about his own exposure. Judges tend to panic when their family members commit potential felonies. I considered this. William Matthews had always struck me as a man of principle. His abrupt departure from the ceremony, citing his duty as an officer of the court, suggested he truly hadn't known about Ryan's activities. I should probably call him back, I decided. But not tonight. Definitely not tonight, Mia agreed. Tonight is for decompression only. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the water. Finally, I voiced the question that had been gnawing at me since we left Boston. When did I miss it, Mia? How did I not see who Ryan really was for 4 entire years? Mia considered this carefully before answering. You saw who he wanted you to see. Ryan was exceptional at crafting and controlling his image. That's what made him successful as an attorney. But you never really liked him, I pointed out. Even from the beginning, she shrugged. I thought he was too polished, too careful. But plenty of people are reserved or private without being deceitful. I never suspected anything like this. I keep thinking about all those Tuesday coffee meetings with Vanessa that he logged as client consultations. All those weekend trips that overlapped with hers. The signs were there if I had been looking. But why would you have been looking? Mia challenged. Healthy relationships aren't built on suspicion. You trusted him because that's what partners do. Before I could respond, Elena appeared at the screen door. Sorry to interrupt, but you should see this. She handed me her tablet, which displayed a breaking news alert from the Boston Business Journal. Breaking, SEC freezes trading accounts. Linked to Anderson Everett merger insider trading investigation. The article detailed how several investment accounts associated with Vanessa Winter's clients had been temporarily frozen pending investigation into suspicious trading patterns ahead of the Anderson Global merger announcement. That was fast, I murmured. The evidence we provided was compelling, Elena explained, and time-sensitive. They couldn't risk funds being moved offshore while they conducted a lengthy preliminary investigation. Another notification appeared on the tablet, an email from Gregory Spencer, the managing partner at Ryan's firm. Ms. Parker, it began formally, I write to express Everett and Shaw's profound regret regarding the circumstances you uncovered today. While we are still assessing the full extent of Mr. Matthews's actions, I want to personally assure you that the firm was unaware of any impropriety. We would appreciate an opportunity to speak with you directly about this matter at your earliest convenience. Additionally, should you require legal representation regarding any aspect of this situation, we would be pleased to recommend several independent attorneys of excellent reputation. They're terrified, Elena observed, about potential liability, reputational damage, client exodus, all of it. They should be, Mia said with uncharacteristic sharpness. How did no one at the firm notice anything suspicious? I handed the tablet back to Elena. People see what they expect to see. Ryan was their golden boy, the youngest partner in the firm's history. Why would they question his methods when he was bringing in lucrative clients like Anderson Global? My phone buzzed. Yet again, this time it was a text from my assistant at the museum. Board emergency meeting tomorrow, RE publicity implications. They're supportive but concerned about press attention affecting the Kahlo exhibition. Call when you can. The real world was continuing to spin, demanding responses and decisions even as I sat wrapped in a quilt trying to process the dramatic unraveling of my personal life. I need to deal with the museum situation, I sighed, the weight of responsibility settling back onto my shoulders. Tomorrow, Elena said firmly, taking my phone and silencing it. The museum will survive one night without you. The board knows where you are if there's a genuine emergency. She was right, of course. Whatever professional fires needed extinguishing could wait until morning. Tonight was for recovery. As Mia and Elena returned inside, I remained on the porch, listening to the rhythmic sound of waves against the shore. The familiar cadence was soothing, a constant in a day where everything else had proven changeable. My father joined me a while later, carrying 2 tumblers of his prized single malt scotch. He handed me one silently, then settled into the chair. Mia had vacated. Your mother's worried about you, he said after a comfortable silence. She thinks you're being too stoic. I smiled faintly. Mom always wanted me to be more expressive with my feelings. That's because she wears hers like jewelry, decorative and visible to everyone. Dad sipped his scotch. You get your internal processing from my side of the family. Is that what I'm doing? Internally processing? That, and calculating your next moves like a chess player. He studied me over the rim of his glass. Just like you were doing at the ceremony this morning. I turned to face him fully. You weren't shocked by what I did. Shocked? No. Impressed? Absolutely. He reached over to pat my hand. Livy, I've watched you solve puzzles since you were 3 years old. You've always had that ability to see patterns and connections that others miss. It's what makes you exceptional at your job. Today you simply applied those skills to a personal situation. His understanding was a balm to my raw emotions. Unlike many parents who might have been horrified by their daughter orchestrating such a public confrontation, Dad recognized it as a natural extension of who I'd always been. I wasn't trying to hurt him, I said softly. I just needed the truth to be known. Truth has always been your North Star. Dad nodded. Even when you were little. Remember when you were 7 and you reported your Sunday school teacher for saying dinosaurs weren't real because they weren't in the Bible? I laughed despite myself. Mrs. Hargrove, she sent me to the principal's office for disrupting God's message. And you came home and announced you needed to go to the Natural History Museum immediately because, and I quote, facts matter more than Mrs. Hargrove's opinions. The memory was a welcome reminder that today's actions, while extraordinary in scale, weren't out of character for me at all. What do you think will happen next? I asked, turning serious again. With Ryan? With the investigation? With all of it? Dad considered this with the measured thoughtfulness of his years on the police force. Professionally, Ryan's career at Everett and Shaw is over. The SEC investigation will likely result in substantial penalties, and the Bar Association will conduct their own ethics review. Depending on the evidence of intent, there could be criminal charges. He paused, swirling, the amber liquid in his glass. Personally, I think he and Vanessa will discover their relationship is less appealing without the excitement of deception and without their professional advantages. Affairs conducted in secrecy rarely survive exposure to daylight. And the Matthews? Family? Dad's expression softened with a hint of compassion. Judge Matthews has a sterling reputation. He'll distance himself from Ryan's actions while providing whatever support he can behind the scenes. Barbara will likely stand by Ryan publicly, while privately reckoning with her role in enabling his behavior. And me? I asked, finally voicing my biggest concern. What happens to me now, Dad? He reached over and took my hand. That, Livy, is entirely up to you. You can let this experience define you, or you can choose how you integrate it into your story going forward. He squeezed my fingers. But I know my daughter. You'll find meaning in this chaos, just like you find narratives in your museum exhibitions. It's who you are. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, I felt the first stirrings of forward momentum. Dad was right. I couldn't control what had happened, but I could choose what came next. My phone buzzed one final time before I silenced it for the night. It was a message from an unexpected source. Philip Anderson. Ms. Parker. I meant what I said about being impressed by your integrity today. The business world needs more people willing to stand for truth, even at personal cost. When you're ready to discuss your future plans, my door is open. Some opportunities emerge from unlikely circumstances. I showed the message to my father, who raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Anderson is known for recognizing talent in unexpected places. I'm happy at the museum, I said automatically, though without complete conviction. Dad just smiled. Of course, you are. But life rarely follows a linear path. The best journeys include unexpected detours. As we sat together watching the stars reflect on the bay waters, I felt something shift inside me. The shock and hurt were still there, but alongside them grew something new, curiosity about what might come next. I'm still going to France, I decided suddenly. Those tickets are non-refundable, and I've always wanted to see Provence in the spring. Sounds perfect, Dad approved. Solo adventures are good for the soul? Not entirely solo, I corrected. I'm thinking of asking Mia to join me. Turn it from a honeymoon into a friendship celebration. Dad raised his glass in salute. To new adventures and better companions. I clinked my tumbler against his, the crystal making a clear, pure sound in the night air. To tell the truth, however complicated it is, it makes things. Inside the house, I could hear my friends and family talking and occasionally laughing. The warm glow from the windows spilled out onto the porch, a reminder that while one relationship had ended today, many others remained strong and true. The wedding I had planned was over, but my story was far from finished. In fact, the most interesting chapters might be yet to come. 3 days after the wedding that wasn't, the Cape Cod house had transformed into an impromptu crisis management headquarters. Despite my attempts to disconnect, the story had taken on a life of its own, growing far beyond a personal drama into a full-fledged financial scandal. I awoke on Tuesday morning to find Elena in the kitchen, multiple devices spread across the breakfast table, moving between calls with the efficiency of a military strategist. The Wall Street Journal wants an exclusive, she reported, covering her phone's microphone as I poured coffee. They're doing an investigative piece on ethical breaches in merger negotiations, with the Anderson-Everett deal as the centerpiece. I shook my head. No exclusives, no interviews yet, not until I've spoken with the museum board. That conversation was scheduled for 10 o'clock. A video call that would determine the professional repercussions of my very public whistleblowing. While my position as department head gave me considerable autonomy, the Gardner Museum depended on donor relationships and positive publicity. The board might view my actions as a liability, regardless of their moral justification, Philip Anderson called. Again, Mia announced, entering the kitchen with her laptop. That's the 3rd time since Sunday. He's persistent. What exactly does he want? I asked, spreading jam on a piece of toast. Besides offering you a job, he wants to coordinate messaging about the merger situation, says it would benefit both of you to present a united front. I considered this as I ate. Anderson was right. Aligning our public statements would strengthen both our positions. His company could frame the collapsed merger as a narrow escape from entanglement with unethical actors, while I could emphasize my role as an accidental whistleblower rather than a jilted bride seeking revenge. Tell him I'll call after my board meeting, I decided. Damon appeared from the sunroom, where he'd set up a makeshift office. You should know that Everett and Shaw just announced a comprehensive internal review of all client matters handled by Ryan Matthews. They've also hired an outside firm to conduct an ethics audit. Damage control, Elena commented. Standard procedure when a firm realizes they might face malpractice claims. What about Ryan himself? I asked, surprised by my own curiosity. Has there been any statement from him? A brief, uncomfortable silence fell over the kitchen. He's not in Boston anymore, Damon finally said, sliding his tablet across the table toward me. On the screen was a grainy photo taken at Logan International Airport, showing Ryan being escorted by 2 severe-looking men in suits. The timestamp showed late Sunday night. Is he under arrest? I asked, studying the image. Elena shook her head. Not officially, but according to my contacts, he's been invited to answer questions at the SEC's Washington office. That's usually a precursor to formal proceedings. The reality of Ryan's situation hit me anew. Whatever I had intended when I exposed his deception, the consequences were now beyond my control, expanding into territory with potential criminal implications. And Vanessa? I asked. Left her apartment Sunday afternoon with 3 suitcases, Damon reported. Destination unknown, but her mother lives in Arizona. I nodded, absorbing this information with surprising detachment. The people who had been central to my life just days ago were now characters in a story I was watching unfold from a distance. It's time for your board meeting, Mia reminded me gently, pointing to the clock. I retreated to my childhood bedroom, which I'd converted into a temporary office. The faded sailing trophies and dog-eared paperbacks from my teenage years provided a surreal backdrop for the high-stakes professional conversation I was about to have. The video call connected to show the museum's boardroom, where 9 members of Gardner's governing body sat around a polished table. Evelyn Winters, the board chair and a formidable presence in Boston's cultural scene, spoke first. Olivia, I want to begin by saying that these are extraordinary circumstances, and we've called this meeting not to reprimand you, but to understand the situation fully and determine how best to proceed. I nodded, maintaining the professional composure that had served me well throughout my career. I appreciate that, Evelyn. I understand my actions on Saturday have created complications for the museum. Perhaps, she acknowledged, but they've also demonstrated the kind of ethical backbone that Augustus Gardner himself valued above all else. She referred to the museum's founder, whose portrait hung prominently in the boardroom. Would you walk us through what happened and why you chose to address it so publicly? For the next 20 minutes, I provided a detailed but measured account of discovering Ryan's deception, uncovering the connection to the Anderson merger, and making the decision to expose both the personal and professional betrayals at the ceremony. When I finished, Marcus Chen, our legal counsel, leaned forward. From the museum's perspective, your actions were taken as a private citizen, not in your capacity as department head. Legally, there's clear separation. However, he adjusted his glasses. The public may not perceive that distinction. The Kahlo exhibition opens in 3 weeks, added Diane Rodriguez, head of public programming. We're already seeing increased interest in tickets, with several mentions of Olivia in social media discussions. People are curious about the curator, who exposed corporate fraud at her own wedding. I winced at this characterization. That wasn't my intention. Intention aside, Evelyn said pragmatically, it's the reality we're facing. Which brings us to the question, how do we proceed? I had anticipated this moment and prepared accordingly. I propose a 3-week leave of absence, effective immediately. It would allow media attention to settle and give me time to address the personal and legal aspects of this situation. Meanwhile, Damon is fully capable of finalizing the exhibition preparations. The board members exchanged glances. Richard Pembroke, our most conservative member, spoke up. While I personally find the public nature of the confrontation uncomfortable, I cannot fault the ethical stance. A leave of absence seems reasonable. With full pay and benefits, added Sophia Nkosi, who had always been my strongest advocate on the board. Olivia didn't create this situation. She merely exposed it. Evelyn surveyed the room, reading the consensus. Then we agreed. 3 weeks, with the understanding that you'll be reachable if absolutely necessary for exhibition matters. And Olivia. Her expression softened slightly. Take care of yourself. This can't have been easy on a personal level. After the call ended, I sat for a moment in the quiet bedroom, processing the outcome. The board's support was professionally validating, but it also underscored how thoroughly my personal and professional worlds had collided. Downstairs, my team awaited the verdict. When I reported the board's decision, Elena immediately shifted into planning mode. Perfect timing. The tickets to France are for Friday. You and Mia can still use the full 2-week itinerary, and then you'll have a week to transition back before returning to work. Tyler, who'd been fielding communications from various media outlets, looked up from his laptop. What should I tell? The press about your leave? They're speculating that you've been fired or forced out. Tell them it's a previously scheduled vacation, I decided. Which is technically true. The honeymoon was on the books for months. Mia raised an eyebrow. Are we really still going to France? In the middle of all this? Absolutely, I said with newfound determination. Ryan doesn't get to ruin Provence for me, too. My phone rang with an unfamiliar Washington, D.C. number. Everyone in the room fell silent, aware of what a call from that area code might signify. Hello, I answered cautiously. Ms. Parker? This is Special Agent Laura Hidalgo with the Securities and Exchange Commission's Enforcement Division. I'm calling regarding the information you provided concerning Ryan Matthews and potential securities violations related to the Anderson Global merger. My throat went dry. Yes? We'd like to formally interview you as a witness in our investigation. Given the circumstances, we can arrange to meet you in Boston rather than requiring you to come to Washington. A federal investigation. This was escalating faster than I'd anticipated. I'm currently on Cape Cod, I explained. But I could come to Boston tomorrow. That would be acceptable, Agent Hidalgo replied. We'll send the details to your email. And Ms. Parker, your cooperation is greatly appreciated. After ending the call, I looked up to find everyone staring at me. The SEC wants a formal interview, I explained unnecessarily. Elena nodded. Expected. They'll want your testimony on record. Should I have an attorney present? I asked, suddenly feeling out of my depth. Yes, Elena and Damon said simultaneously. Not anyone from Everett and Shaw, obviously, Damon added. I can reach out to my contact at Morrison and Bailey. They specialize in SEC matters. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations, coordinating with the attorney Damon recommended, arranging to drive to Boston the following morning, and continuing to field the seemingly endless messages from media, colleagues, and even wedding guests still processing what they'd witnessed. By evening, I was mentally exhausted. When my mother suggested a walk on the beach, I gratefully accepted the chance to escape the constant strategizing. The May evening was cool but clear, the beach nearly empty as we made our way along the shoreline. Mom had always been my emotional weather vane, sensing shifts in my mood long before I could articulate them myself. You haven't cried yet, she observed after we'd walked in silence for several minutes. Not once since it happened. I looked out, at the horizon where the darkening sky met the ocean. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be crying about. The relationship that wasn't real? The wedding that didn't happen? The fact that my personal crisis has somehow become a federal investigation? Any or all of those would be reasonable, Mom said gently. Or maybe you're crying for the future you thought you had, that now needs to be reimagined. Her words pierced through the protective layer of pragmatism I'd wrapped around myself. For all my focus on exposing Ryan's deception and managing the aftermath, I hadn't fully confronted what it meant for my own life narrative. I really thought I knew him, I admitted, my voice catching. 4 years, Mom. 4 years of building a life with someone who was playing an entirely different game. She slipped her arm through mine. The hardest betrayals come from those we never imagined could hurt us. The thing is, I continued, a dam of emotion finally beginning to crack. I keep asking myself if I missed the signs because I was too busy with work, or because I wanted so badly to believe in what we had. Or maybe, Mom suggested, there were no signs to miss because Ryan was exceptionally skilled at deception. Intelligence and charm can be powerful masks for dishonesty. We had reached a cluster of rocks that jutted into the water. I sat down, on one, hugging my knees to my chest as tears finally began to fall. I feel so foolish, I whispered. Mom settled beside me, her shoulder pressed against mine in silent support. There's nothing foolish about trusting someone who presents themselves as trustworthy. The shame belongs to Ryan, not to you. We stayed there as twilight deepened, the rhythmic sound of waves providing a soundtrack to my delayed emotional release. By the time we headed back toward the house, I felt lighter, as if acknowledging the personal pain had created space for moving forward. The following morning brought a new development. As I prepared to leave for Boston, Damon intercepted me with, "His tablet. You need to see this," he said, with an uncharacteristic urgency in his voice. On the screen was a breaking news alert. Matthews resigns. Embattled attorney steps down amid SEC probe. The article detailed Ryan's formal resignation from Everett and Shaw, including a brief statement acknowledging lapses in judgment regarding the Anderson Global matter, while denying any intentional securities violations. "There's more," Damon said, scrolling down. "Vanessa Winters has agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for reduced penalties." So, Vanessa had turned on Ryan. The partnership they'd schemed so carefully to establish had crumbled under the first sign of legal pressure. "She always was pragmatic," I remarked, remembering how Ryan had described her career-focused approach to life as a flaw rather than a strength. "She'll protect herself first." The attorney Damon had arranged, Layla Morrison, met me at her firm's Boston office before the SEC interview. In her mid-50s, with a reputation for razor-sharp competence, she projected exactly the kind of confidence I needed. "Let me be clear about your position in all this," she said after reviewing the evidence I'd provided. "You're a witness, not a target. The SEC is interested in the information you discovered, not in your actions in revealing it." "What about the fact that I accessed Ryan's email accounts?" I asked the question that had been nagging at me since the investigation began. Layla's expression was reassuring. "You had his password, which he had shared with you. You were his fiancé with access to shared living space and devices. There's no legal issue there." The interview itself was methodical and detailed. Agent Hidalgo and her colleague, Agent Torres, recorded my testimony about discovering Ryan's communications with Vanessa, uncovering the connection to the Anderson merger, and finding evidence of information being shared with select investors. "Did Mr. Matthews ever explicitly state that he was providing confidential merger information to Ms. Winters for financial advantage?" Agent Torres asked. "Not in those exact words," I acknowledged, "but the timing of the communications, coupled with the trading activity from her clients, creates a clear pattern." Agent Hidalgo nodded. "The pattern is what interests us. Individual communications might be ambiguous, but the overall timeline tells a compelling story." After 2 hours of questioning, they thanked me for my cooperation and indicated they might need additional testimony as the case progressed. "What happens now?" I asked Layla as we left the federal building. "Now," she said pragmatically, "the SEC continues their investigation. They'll interview Ryan, Vanessa, possibly Kevin Walsh and others at both firms. They'll analyze trading records and communication patterns. It's a methodical process. And my involvement is largely complete, unless they need clarification on specific evidence. My advice?" She handed me a business card. "Go to France. Turn off the news alerts. Let the legal system do its work." It was sound counsel, and exactly what I intended to do. But before I could leave Boston, there was one more meeting I needed to take. Philip Anderson had requested a brief conversation at his company's headquarters. Given his persistence and the central role his merger had played in the entire situation, I'd agreed to a 30-minute meeting. Anderson Global occupied the top floors of a sleek downtown tower. The reception area overlooked Boston Harbor, its minimalist design projecting exactly the kind of contemporary corporate success that had made Philip Anderson a business icon. He greeted me personally rather than sending an assistant, a courtesy that suggested the importance he placed on our conversation. "Ms. Parker," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for making time today. I know you must be inundated with requests." "Mr. Anderson," I replied, matching his professional tone. Given the circumstances, I felt we should speak directly. His office was surprisingly modest for someone of his stature, functional rather than ostentatious, with strategic views of the harbor and walls lined with nautical maps rather than the expected corporate awards. I've sailed all my life, he explained, noticing my interest in the maps. It teaches you to respect forces beyond your control while still plotting your own course. A useful philosophy in business and in life. He gestured to a sitting area, where coffee had been arranged. I'll be direct, Ms. Parker. I'm impressed by your integrity. In exposing Ryan Matthews's deception, you potentially saved my company from a compromised merger and prevented what could have been a significant financial and reputational blow. I wasn't thinking about your company's interests, I admitted. I was focused on exposing the truth before I unwittingly became part of a fraud. The best ethical decisions often serve multiple purposes, he observed. Your personal integrity is aligned with broader corporate and legal integrity. That's rare and valuable. He leaned forward slightly. Which is why I wanted to discuss your future plans. I'm still processing recent events, I hedged, but I remain committed to my position at the Gardner Museum. Of course, the cultural sector is fortunate to have someone of your caliber. He sipped his coffee thoughtfully. However, should you ever consider a change, Anderson Global is creating a new position, Director of Corporate Integrity and Cultural Compliance. The role would combine ethical oversight with cultural acquisition management for our corporate collection. The offer caught me off guard. You want to hire me? Because I exposed fraud at my wedding? Anderson smiled slightly. I want to hire you because you demonstrated exceptional analytical skills, ethical clarity, and the courage to act on your convictions, qualities I value above typical corporate credentials. It was a compelling proposition. The salary he mentioned was substantially higher than my museum position, and the role would allow me to bridge my cultural expertise with a new professional direction. I'm not making any decisions right now, I said carefully. But I appreciate the offer and will consider it when I'm ready to think about next steps. That's all I ask, Anderson replied. Take your time. Go to France. The position will be available when you return. As I left the gleaming tower and headed back to Cape Cod, I felt a strange sense of possibility beginning to emerge from the wreckage of my personal life. What Ryan had intended as manipulation had inadvertently opened doors I hadn't known existed. That evening, as Mia and I finalized our packing for the trip to France, I found myself able to laugh again at her terrible French pronunciation and excessive shoe selection. You realize we'll be walking on cobblestones, right? I teased, pointing to her impractical heels. Some sacrifices for beauty are worth making, she declared dramatically. Elena appeared in the doorway. Your travel security protocol is finalized. The French hotels have been briefed on privacy measures, and I've arranged for a media deflection strategy while you're away. I shook my head, amused by her thoroughness. Elena, we're going to small villages in Provence, not entering a witness protection program. In the age of social media, nowhere is truly isolated, she countered. But point taken, I may be overcorrecting. My father knocked on the open door, holding a small package. Special delivery from Judge Matthews, he announced. It arrived by courier an hour ago. I accepted the package with surprise. While Judge Matthews had called several times, I hadn't spoken with him directly since the wedding day. Inside was a handwritten note and a small velvet box. Olivia, the note read in the judge's precise handwriting. While words cannot adequately address recent events, please know that I hold you in the highest regard for your integrity and courage. The enclosure belonged to my grandmother, a woman of similar strength who valued truth above convenience. It was to be your wedding gift. I believe she would still want you to have it. With deep respect, William Matthews. The velvet box contained an antique compass pendant on a delicate silver chain. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly a family heirloom of significant sentimental value. Wow, Mia breathed, looking over my shoulder. That's unexpected. It's his way of saying he believes you over his son, my father observed. A powerful statement from a father and a judge. I carefully replaced the compass in its box, touched by the gesture and what it represented. Despite everything, there was still honor in unexpected places. As night fell on our last evening at Cape Cod before departing for France, I stepped outside, alone, to look at the stars. The past week had altered the course of my life in ways I was still struggling to comprehend. The relationship I had believed in was gone, replaced by a complex web of legal proceedings, career possibilities, and personal recalibration. Yet standing under the vast starlit sky, I felt strangely unburdened. The truth, however painful, had set a new course for my journey, one that was authentically mine, free from deception and compromise. When Mia called me inside to finalize our itinerary, I took one last look at the constellations above. Whatever came next would be my own story to write, navigated by the inner compass that had guided me to recognize truth when it mattered most. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of my new office, casting geometric patterns across the contemporary art installation that dominated the far wall. From the 42nd floor of the Anderson Global headquarters, Boston Harbor stretched out like a living canvas, dotted with boats catching the late October breeze. 6 months had passed since the wedding day that never was, and my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined during those chaotic days at Cape Cod. The trip to France with Mia had been exactly what I needed, a complete disconnection from the media frenzy and legal proceedings. We'd wandered through lavender fields in Provence, sampled wines in small family vineyards, and spent long evenings in village cafes talking about everything except Ryan Matthews and the scandal that had dominated Boston's business news. It wasn't until our return that I learned the full extent of developments during our absence. Ryan had accepted a settlement with the SEC, admitting to securities violations in exchange for a reduced civil penalty. The settlement included a 5-year ban from practicing securities law and a substantial financial penalty. He'd avoided criminal charges, but his professional reputation was irreparably damaged. Vanessa's cooperation had earned her more lenient treatment, a smaller fine and no practice restrictions, though her career prospects in Boston were effectively finished. According to Elena's sources, she had relocated to Phoenix and joined her mother's real estate firm. Everett and Shaw had undergone a significant restructuring, with Gregory Spencer stepping down as managing partner after the internal review revealed systemic oversight failures. The firm had settled with Anderson Global for an undisclosed amount related to the merger mishandling, and I had returned to the Gardner Museum as planned, overseeing the successful opening of the Kahlo exhibition. But 3 weeks later, I'd submitted my resignation. Now, as the newly appointed Director of Corporate Integrity and Cultural Compliance at Anderson Global, I was pioneering a role that combined ethical oversight with management of the company's extensive art collection. A knock at my office door interrupted my reminiscence. "Ms. Parker, Mr. Anderson would like to see you before the board meeting." Jackie, Philip's assistant, stood in the doorway with the efficient friendliness that characterized her interactions. "I'll be right there," I assured her, gathering the presentation materials I'd prepared for today's quarterly ethics committee review. Walking through the executive floor, I passed the gallery space I'd designed to showcase rotating pieces from the Anderson Corporate Collection, currently featuring emerging Boston artists in an exhibition that had garnered positive reviews from the city's cultural critics. Philip Anderson was reviewing documents at his desk when I entered, but rose immediately to greet me. "Olivia, excellent timing. I wanted to discuss the SEC's new corporate governance guidelines before we present them to the board." Over the past 6 months, I'd come to appreciate Anderson's direct approach and genuine commitment to ethical business practices. What I'd initially suspected might be a PR move, hiring the woman who had exposed securities fraud at her own wedding, had proven to be a substantive position with real authority. "I've incorporated their recommendations into the updated compliance framework," I explained, showing him the relevant section of our presentation. The key differences affect disclosure timelines for potential merger announcements. He nodded, approvingly. Good, very good. The board will appreciate your thoroughness. He paused, studying me with the penetrating gaze that had intimidated generations of business associates. You seem settled in the role now. Those early reservations behind you? I smiled, acknowledging his perception. When I first accepted the position, I harbored concerns about transitioning from museum curator to corporate executive, worried that I might be sacrificing my cultural expertise for a business title. The integration of ethics oversight with cultural management has been more synergistic than I anticipated, I admitted, though I still visit Gardner on weekends like a homesick alumna. Anderson laughed. Understandable. But you've brought something valuable to our corporate environment, a curator's eye for detail and narrative that serves us well in ethics enforcement. As we headed toward the boardroom, he asked the question he posed before every major meeting. Any concerns I should be aware of? It was his way of ensuring I felt empowered to raise difficult issues, even those that might implicate senior leadership. Today, however, I had only positive updates. The peer review program is showing promising results. Employees are identifying potential issues earlier, before they develop into actual violations. The board meeting proceeded smoothly, with my ethics committee presentation receiving unanimous approval for implementation. Afterward, as executives dispersed to their respective offices, I checked my phone to find a message from Mia. Dinner. Tonight? Big news to share, I smiled, texting back confirmation. Mia had recently been promoted to creative director at her advertising agency, a position she'd been working toward for years. Whatever news she had would undoubtedly be worth celebrating. Back. In my office, I found a courier envelope on my desk marked Personal and Confidential. Inside was a formal letter from the Massachusetts Bar Association's Ethics Committee requesting my participation in an educational panel on corporate governance and professional responsibility. The irony wasn't lost on me, being asked to speak about legal ethics because I'd exposed an unethical attorney. Life had a strange way of creating purpose from pain. My afternoon included a review of potential acquisitions for the corporate art collection, followed by an ethics training session for the new analyst cohort. As I explained the company's commitment to transparency and regulatory compliance, I could see recognition dawning on several faces. Young professionals connecting my name to the scandal that had made national headlines months earlier. I no longer minded the association. While I hadn't chosen to become known for exposing fraud at my own wedding, I had chosen how to transform that experience into professional expertise. At 6, I wrapped up my final meeting and headed to the waterfront restaurant where Mia and I had arranged to meet. The October evening was unusually mild, allowing for outdoor seating with views of the harbor lights beginning to twinkle against the darkening sky. Mia was already there, radiant with barely contained excitement. She stood to hug me, then immediately thrust her left hand forward, where a stunning sapphire ring caught the ambient lighting. "James proposed," she announced, beaming. "Last night at the Gardner, in front of that medieval tapestry I've always loved." "Mia, that's wonderful." I embraced her again, genuinely thrilled. She and James had been dating for nearly 2 years, their relationship one of mutual support and shared ambitions. "Tell me everything. How did he ask? Were you surprised?" As she launched into the details of the proposal, I felt nothing but joy. For my friend, no shadow of my own wedding experience, no reflexive comparison to what might have been. That emotional freedom was perhaps the most significant marker of my recovery. "And," she concluded, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, "I want you to be my maid of honor. If you're comfortable with that, given everything." I laughed, touched by her consideration. "Mia, I would be honored, though I draw the line at catching any bouquets." Our conversation flowed easily through dinner, covering her preliminary wedding ideas, my recent work challenges, and updates on mutual friends. It wasn't until dessert arrived that Mia's expression turned more serious. "I ran into Barbara Matthews at Newbury Street yesterday," she said carefully, watching for my reaction. I maintained my composure, though the name still triggered a complex emotional response. "How did that go?" "Awkwardly, as you might expect. But she asked about you, how you were doing, if you were well." I considered this, stirring my coffee thoughtfully. "That's surprisingly considerate given the circumstances." Mia hesitated before continuing. "She mentioned that Ryan has moved to Chicago, started over with a small consulting firm that doesn't require bar admission. The information registered as little more than a footnote in a chapter I'd finished reading. I hope he finds whatever was missing that made deception seem necessary," I said finally, meaning it. "That's incredibly generous of you," Mia observed. "Most people in your position would still be bitter." I shrugged. "Bitterness requires ongoing emotional investment, and I decided my energy was better spent elsewhere." I smiled wryly. "Besides, the monthly updates from my investment account are healing in their own way." Part of Ryan's SEC settlement had included restitution to parties affected by the securities violations. As his former fiancé with documented evidence of being used in the scheme, I'd received a substantial settlement that now funded the foundation I'd established to support arts education in underserved Boston communities. After dinner, we walked along the waterfront, the fall air crisp with possibilities. Mia shared her vision for a spring wedding. Nothing extravagant, just meaningful and authentic, while I offered genuine support unburdened by my own experience. "Olivia," she said suddenly, stopping to face me directly, "I need to ask you something important, and I want you to be completely honest." "Always," I promised, curious about her serious tone. "Are you happy? Not just professionally successful or emotionally stable, but actually happy?" The question deserved careful consideration. 6 months ago, I would have struggled to answer truthfully. But now, with the perspective of time and the foundation of new beginnings, I could respond with certainty. "Yes," I said simply. Not in the way I expected to be at this point in my life, but genuinely, authentically happy. My work matters. My relationships are honest. My future is open to possibilities I never considered before. Mia studied my face, seemingly satisfied with what she saw. "Good. Because you deserve that after everything." When I returned to my apartment, that evening, I found another courier envelope, this one from Judge Matthews. Inside was a formal invitation to the annual fundraiser for the Children's Legal Defense Fund, a cause he had championed throughout his career. Attached was a handwritten note. "Your voice would be valuable to our discussion panel on ethical leadership. No obligation, but a sincere request." I placed the invitation on my desk, next to the compass pendant he had given me, which now rested in a small display case rather than being worn. Both represented a complicated connection to a family I'd almost joined, a connection that had somehow evolved into mutual respect despite the painful circumstances. The next morning brought another significant milestone. My phone chimed with a notification from the Boston Business Journal. SEC concludes Anderson Matthews investigation. Final penalties announced. The article detailed the formal conclusion of the investigation that had consumed much of the past 6 months. With all settlements finalized and penalties assessed, the legal chapter of the story was officially closing. By strange coincidence, today also marked the 6-month anniversary of what would have been my wedding day. The symmetry wasn't lost on me as I prepared for work, choosing a midnight blue suit that subtly echoed the jumpsuit I'd worn that dramatic morning at the Belmont Harbor Hotel. As I left my apartment building, I nearly collided with a woman hurrying past, her arms full of document boxes. "I'm so sorry," she apologized, struggling to maintain her grip on the precarious stack. "Let me help," I offered, steadying the topmost box. "Thanks, that's really kind." She smiled gratefully. "First day at the new job, and I'm already running late." Been there, I assured her, holding the door. Good luck today. Her genuine thanks reminded me of small kindnesses, how the world continued to function through basic human decency despite the more dramatic betrayals that occasionally punctuated life. At the office, I found an email from the curator who had replaced me at the Gardner, seeking collaboration on an exhibition exploring ethical dimensions in contemporary art. The proposal included a potential display on visual representations of truth and deception, with a gentle acknowledgement of how my personal experience might inform such a project. Rather than feeling exploited, I was intrigued by the conceptual framework. The curator had approached the idea with sensitivity and intellectual rigor, seeing the broader implications beyond the sensational aspects of my story. I wrote back expressing interest in principle, suggesting we meet to discuss parameters that would serve educational purposes while respecting all parties involved. It felt like an opportunity to transform personal history into cultural dialogue, exactly the kind of meaning-making my curatorial training had prepared me for. Midday brought another development, this one entirely unexpected. Elena, who had parlayed her crisis management work during my wedding drama into a thriving security consultancy, arrived unannounced at my office. I have information you should know, she said without preamble, closing the door behind her. That sounds ominous, I observed, gesturing for her to sit. Professional or personal? Both. She placed a folder on my desk. Vanessa Winters contacted me yesterday, requesting a meeting. She wants to apologize to you directly. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. After 6 months of silence? Apparently, she's been in therapy, working through her role in the deception. She expressed what seemed like genuine remorse. I opened the folder to find a handwritten letter addressed to me. The writing was unmistakably Vanessa's, the same. Elegant script I'd seen on the invitation that had started this entire journey. I told her I would pass along her request, but made no promises regarding your response. Elena continued. She's in Boston for 3 days on family business. I scanned the letter, which expressed remorse without excuses and acknowledged the harm caused by her actions. The final paragraph was particularly striking. I don't expect forgiveness or even understanding, but I believe in facing the consequences of one's choices directly. If you're willing to meet, I would appreciate the opportunity to apologize in person. What are you thinking? Elena asked, noting my thoughtful expression. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that closure takes many forms, and sometimes the unexpected ones are the most valuable. After careful consideration, I decided to meet Vanessa the following afternoon at a neutral location, a quiet cafe equidistant from both our offices. Elena insisted on accompanying me, positioning herself at a nearby table like a protective sentinel. Vanessa arrived precisely on time, dressed conservatively in a gray suit that contrasted sharply with the bold emerald dress she'd worn to my wedding. She seemed smaller somehow, the confident attorney persona diminished by circumstances and perhaps by honest self-reflection. Thank you for agreeing to meet, she began, her composure professional but fragile. I wouldn't have blamed you for refusing. I was curious, I admitted. About why now, after 6 months? She nodded, accepting the directness. I've been working with a therapist, trying to understand my own patterns of behavior. The choices I made with Ryan weren't isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern of seeking validation through complicated relationships. It wasn't what I'd expected, not an attempt to justify or minimize, but a frank acknowledgement of deeper issues. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, she continued. What Ryan and I did was inexcusable on every level. But I wanted you to know that I recognize the harm we caused, and I'm working to ensure I never participate in anything like that again. I appreciate your candor, I said, finding myself surprisingly unmoved by either anger or sympathy. Genuinely. But I've moved forward with my life, and I suggest you do the same. She nodded, seeming to have expected this response. I understand. Just one more thing. She reached into her bag and withdrew a small flash drive. This contains all remaining communications between Ryan and me that weren't part of the SEC investigation. Personal emails, mostly. I thought you might want them destroyed rather than lingering on servers somewhere. I considered the flash drive, recognizing the gesture for what it was, an attempt at amends through concrete action rather than just words. Thank you, I said, accepting it. For what it's worth, I hope you find peace with your decisions. Our meeting lasted less than 15 minutes, but as I watched Vanessa leave the cafe, I felt an unexpected sense of resolution. Not forgiveness exactly, but a closing of accounts that allowed both of us to proceed without the weight of unfinished business. That evening, I found myself drawn to the harbor walkway again, the water reflecting city lights in fractured patterns that reminded me of how perspective changes everything. 6 months earlier, I had stood in a hotel suite preparing to expose a painful truth. Now I stood as someone transformed by that decision, leading a life I hadn't planned but had consciously chosen. My phone rang. It was my father, calling for our weekly check-in. Just checking that we're still on for Thanksgiving, he said after our usual exchange of weekly highlights. Your mother's already planning the menu. Wouldn't miss it, I assured him. And yes, I'll bring that Cabernet Mom likes. Good, good. He paused, then added with fatherly intuition, Everything else all right? You sound thoughtful. I smiled at his perception. Just reflecting on the past 6 months, it's been quite a journey. The best navigators are those who can chart a course through unexpected storms, he replied, invoking the sailing metaphor he'd used throughout my childhood. You've done that admirably, Livy. After we hung up, I continued my walk, noticing how completely the seasons had changed since May. The spring flowers that had adorned my almost wedding day had given way to autumn's rich palette, a transition that mirrored my own transformation. In the end, what Ryan had intended as manipulation had become the catalyst for authentic self-discovery. What might have been the beginning of a compromised life based on deception had instead launched me into a future built on hard-won truth. As I turned toward home, a bride and groom emerged from a waterfront restaurant, surrounded by celebrating friends. The bride laughed as her new husband twirled her beneath the string lights decorating the patio. Their joy was palpable, unforced. Real. I smiled, genuinely happy for these strangers beginning their journey together. Their story wasn't mine, but watching them reminded me that authentic love existed and that recognizing its absence in my own relationship had been an act of self-respect rather than failure. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, I had constructed a life that honored truth above comfort, substance above appearance, and genuine connection above convenient partnership. The journey hadn't been easy, but standing in the crisp autumn air, watching the water reflect countless lights against the darkening sky, I was certain it had been worth every difficult step. Some people found their happy endings in traditional fairy tales. I had found mine by writing my own story, one based not on romantic fantasy, but on the quiet power of living authentically, even when that meant standing alone, or perhaps especially then. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.